all you cool cats and kittens. It's Miss Smith here with a lesson about poetry. So we're actually going to start here with the writing prompt that I'm going to give you as your second assignment. And then we're going to work backwards from the writing prompt. I'm going to read it and annotate as I go. Although with any writing prompt, you should be doing this also to get in a good habit of understanding what a writing prompt is trying to say, breaking it down so that you can then turn it into a piece of writing for yourself. So as it was with each of our mentor poets, which we're going to look at in just a moment, we often think of ways to express our thoughts about ourselves and if we should truly dare to share those thoughts with others. As your culminating task, each student will create an original poem using your choice of the poets we have studied as a mentor text. Use the poet's ideas for guidance on how you might share or express your thoughts about yourself or how you might share your thoughts with others in a poem. You will decide how to use poetic elements, such as figurative language and imagery, to convey your theme and create meaning. All right, so here's what I'm seeing here as I'm reading this. A lot of texts talk of mentor texts and poets. So as it was with each of our poets, we think about ways to express our thoughts. Each of you will create an original poem. So this whole first sentence isn't actually giving me anything I can use to help me with the task. Each student will create an original poem. So here I'm just going to underline this because it's telling me what to do, create an original poem. Using your choice of the poets we have studied as a mentor text. Use the poet's ideas for guidance and how you might share or express your thoughts about. So all it's saying is like use other poets for guidance. So I'm going to get rid of this because it's just restating the next sentence. And then next is just telling you how to use the mentor text. So what I'm really seeing here is create an original poem and use other poets' ideas to help you write that poem. You will decide how to use poetic elements to convey your theme and create meaning. So you're gonna have a choice of what kind of poetic elements you want to use and how you want to use them and what you want your theme to be, what you want the meaning of your poem to be. So just kind of what I'm reading here is it's up to you. Essentially, the only requirement here is to write a poem. So as long as you can call it a poem and you use some mentor text to help you, then it seems like you're satisfying the expectations of this writing prompt. All right, so that's easy enough. That's what you're going to do. Create an original poem, use other poems to help you, and try and include some poetic elements like your mentor poets did. Awesome. All right, we're going to keep moving. So we're going to look at one of the mentor texts that I'm going to give you on the slideshow to examine and potentially use to help guide your own poetry. Some of you are already in the world of poetry. You've got some favorite poets, rappers, singer-songwriters that you might want to look for, but I'm going to be giving you a list. There's especially one author on there who I'm going to recommend you all look at. But this is a good one for us to just start with to examine I was using this as a mentor text, what can I take out of this? How can I use Fences by Pat Mora to help me write my poem? So I'm going to go through and notice, what do I love about this poem? What is she doing? What can I do? I'm going to do all that while I'm reading. Mouths full of laughter, the touristas come to the tall hotel with suitcases full of dollars. So I'm noticing that she's using words, I'm assuming it's a she, words from Spanish, I'm guessing, to help kind of give voice to the poem, so it can already tell what kind of an author. We have line breaks here, so this whole thing is considered a stanza. We'll go over some poetry terms in just a moment. This whole thing's a stanza, and each line of the stanza is broken off at a particular point. Notice that it's not always whenever we hit punctuation, because at the end of this line here, we do not see any punctuation. It just goes on to the next line. So as a poet, you might want to consider how to break your own lines up. Maybe each idea that you want to communicate gets its own line. Maybe you just like the look of a certain line length. Notice that these poems aren't going to rhyme, most of them, and that is completely okay. We are now at the point in our educations, in our writing, in our reading, where we're going to address and create poetry that does not rhyme. So you aren't necessarily ending lines here wherever the rhyme is. You're ending lines wherever you feel like your idea has ended, whatever sounds the best, whatever looks the best. Poetry is more of an art form in that way. All right, and then I like that suitcase is full of dollars here. This is just really good imagery. Instead of saying with a lot of money, I'm picturing like silly tourists literally with their suitcases stuffed full of just money to spend. So I think it's giving it a little bit almost of a humorous imagery. Every morning my brother makes the cool beach new for them. With a wooden board, he smooths away all footprints. All right. So notice too that when I'm reading it, I'm stopping at the punctuation. I'm not stopping at the end of the line. Every morning, my brother makes the cool beach new for them. With a wooden board, he smooths away all footprints. Stopping after each period. I'm liking cool beach because I can feel that on my toes. I think that means like a chilly like beach sand is what I'm picturing. So again, more imagery, the more sensory you are, the better. If I can feel it, that's awesome. If I can see it, smell it, taste it. With a wooden board, he smooths away all footprints. Here I'm also thinking about the meaning of this poem. So we start with silly tourists, mouths full, laughing, suitcases full, kind of a lot of extra. Now I'm seeing that the author's brother is what's kind of making things happen behind the scenes, making everything seem smooth and new for them. So he's wiping away all of their busyness from the day before, so that every day feels like it's something new just for them. I peek through the cactus fence. Ooh, I love that imagery because I'm just picturing a bunch of cacti all kind of growing up so that you have to kind of peer over the tops of them in order to see beyond them. So I'm not picturing a real fence. I'm just picturing that the fence is a bunch of cacti that you have to kind of peer over in order to picture what's behind them. So this word choice is giving me some delicious imagery, and it's also just really unique. Instead of just saying I peered over cacti, the cactus fence. And watch the women rub oil sweeter than honey into their arms and legs. Again, yum. I can smell it. I can see the oil. I can see the color without her even mentioning the color because she's comparing it to honey. While their children jump waves or sip drinks from long straws, coconut white, mango yellow. Again, these great descriptions to make a color part of a tropical fruit gives us a sense of scenery. And yet I'm also picturing the entire scene here. Now I notice that her and her brother now are both behind kind of the divide between tourists and workers or just observers. Notice that the author is not really part of this, but she's seeing all this rich stuff happening on the other side of a very harsh divide between the two, what almost seem like classes. Once my sister ran barefoot across the hot sand for a taste. All right. Now here I'm noticing that the sand is hot, which is interesting because that is in contrast to something earlier. So I'm going to be thinking about why would the author make the sand cool earlier and hot here. I'm also already nervous for her because she was on the other side of the divide. Now she's running across hot sand. So maybe this is also leading to some foreshadowing, like, is this a bad idea? Notice that everything that separates these people, the author and her family, from the tourists, is kind of harsh. Hot sand, we have wooden boards and a cactus fence. My mother roared like the ocean. No, no, it's their beach. It's their beach. So even though they live so close, her brother works there. Notice that she's ending with this really powerful couple of sentences. The repetition here is also lending importance to this idea that it is not hers, it is not her sisters or brothers or mothers, that this natural landscape belongs to all these people from far away who come and spend their money there. So I'm noticing all of these, I could go back and reread it and find even more. Like, I'm noticing why she's describing these suntanned people rubbing oil into themselves. I can consider that. Their children kind of jumping. Well, I'm assuming that her and her brother and sister are also children, but they are not jumping waves or sipping drinks from large straws. So these rich descriptions in just a short amount of time send a really potent message. I grew up in a place there were the rich tourists who owned the beach and had all of these extravagant amenities, whereas me and my family worked the beach, but were not allowed on the beach because it was not ours. That could have been stated in a couple of sentences, but instead we really get to feel the hurt of not belonging because we see such rich imagery on their side and such harsh distance on the other side. So as an author, as a poet, I'm thinking, well, what can I do? Here are some of my takeaways. I want to use some of the imagery in my poem. I'm obviously not going to copy hers, but I'm going to come up with my own colors, tastes, smells, sights, because I loved that part of this poem. And I thought that it really lent to the meaning of it. And I'm going to make sure I include as many of the senses as possible. I'm going to try to come up with some unique word choice, although I don't know if I can be this clever. Like, I loved that cactus fence imagery. I love coconut white, mango yellow. So some of these things are something different than I would have ordinarily heard. I'm going to see if I can come up with something a little bit new. And then I like this ending. So maybe I can try and end with a potent message. Maybe finally I end with some dialogue because that was the first time we saw anybody speaking. Maybe I choose to end with kind of what punches the reader in the gut the most. So when you're going through these poems, that's kind of how you want to be reading them and thinking about them. Read and think about them in terms of what you love and take the strategy instead of taking the words from your poet. All right, now the last thing I wanted to go over was some key poetic devices and terms. These are things that I think most of you know, but I want to make sure that if you see them, you know what they mean, and that if you're planning on using them, you're using them correctly. So I think we know what alliteration means. Now, chorus is something that we typically see in songs. However, poetry dates back, thousands of years. And this was actually, for a while, a very popular way to create poems, is to have a chorus in the poem, just like when you sing along to your favorite song and that part that it might be a little slower or louder or clearer, more catchy, and it repeats throughout the song. Perhaps that's something that you want to consider doing. Free verse is poem that has no rhyme or consistent pattern. So that's similar to the poem that I just read. A line I pointed out in my last slide. A metaphor I think we're good on. Onomatopoeia is like a sound word like oof or bop. Patterns are a great strategy in poetry. So this is when the poem literally looks like the subject it's written about. So if you are writing about a pear, then your entire poem might take the shape of a pear, which is a cool way of structuring a poem. Hard to execute, but really cool if you can. Personification is when we give non-human objects human characteristics. Now, we're used to, in our childhood reading and writing, seeing animals being personified, but in more adult poetry, when objects that are important to you or your family or your setting have some sort of characteristic that's not usually attributed to the object, that's kind of what we're thinking about. So, for example, in the last poem, if the cactus fence had looked on and withered, feeling inadequate to the coconut white straw or whatever, then it's all of a sudden got a personality and a sense of agency that cactus that a cactus usually doesn't have. So that's kind of what we're talking about in personification, not just animals like talking. So consider what objects, how you can say that an object can kind of do something or act in a way that an object usually wouldn't. I recommend that you don't rhyme, or that you rhyme internally instead of doing this, rhyming the last syllable of the line. Or that's his word, but in rhyming the last syllable of the line, I recommend that you do not do that. Internal rhyme, like Aruna in our fourth period, is a great model of this. He does a great job with that. But sometimes when we get too caught up in the rhyme, we lose some of the more rich imagery and meaning of the poem. So don't make it so that you're sacrificing other parts of your poem just so that you can get the rhyme working. Rhythm is the tempo or speed that a poem can be read at. This is really important. When you're reading, your voice should almost sound like a song. It should get loud at some parts, quiet at others, slow in some parts, speedy in others. There should be a tempo like you would hear in music to your reading if you're reading it aloud. So consider that as you're writing. Stop, read aloud what you've written, and feel it, listen to the feeling of the tempo or speed, and see if there's anything you need to adjust. We read a lot of run-on lines or enjambments in the last poem. So that is when a line of poetry starts on one line and then continues on to the next line, an idea. So like if you're continuing on with a sentence on the next line, that's called a run-on line. Totally okay. It's not like a run-on sentence where it's a bad thing. It's just one way to write a line or several lines of poetry. We know what similes are. I showed you in my last slide what stanzas are. And then we know that a theme is the underlying message, just like our last poem had. So that's your lesson on poetry. Take a look through the rest of your slides to see what it is that you're expected to do. All right, bye.